I'm Adele Simmons, and I'm pleased on behalf of Chicago Council on Global Affairs to welcome all of you. And today we have with us two esteemed panelists who will help us reconcile why the gender gap persists despite the positive outcomes of investing in women. You have a full copy of their bios on their chairs, but let me briefly highlight a few points. Laura Anderson is Managing Director and Chief of Staff at the Office of the Midwest Chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase. She served as a senior banker for J.P. Morgan's private banking sector, and she sits on the board at various Chicago institutions, including Chicago Sister Cities International, the Wood Family Foundation, and 1871. Vicki Escarra worked at Delta Airlines and Feeding America before becoming CEO of Opportunity International in 2012. Opportunity International is one of the largest microfinance networks with over 17,000 employees in 25 countries. It reaches over 10 million people. Vicki has significantly simplified a large and complex organization and introduced appropriate metrics so that Opportunity International can serve its clients better. She has effectively rebranded the organization from top to bottom, and as one of my informants says, thanks to Vicki's leadership, Opportunity International has emerged as a leading global player. Niamh King, Vice President of the Programs of the Chicago Council, will lead the conversation on stage first, and then open the floor to your questions. Please join me in welcoming Vicki and Laura to the program.
Thanks, Adele. Thanks, everybody. As Adele said, we're really delighted to have two leaders from two different industries here to talk about such an important topic that we cover fairly regularly through the Women in Global Development Forum. So I think we'll start off with you, Vicki. So at the council here, we've hosted Mohammed Yunus a few times. Maybe some of you were there. And he said that microfinance is based on the potential of a person. And this potential that Yunus speaks of has no doubt been found in women around the world. As his colleagues in the microfinance industry regularly report, women are very reliable very reliable investment, and they're more likely to repay loans and invest in families and communities. Can you talk a little bit about the impact microfinance can have on communities where women are given financial support, and what models you and Opportunity International have seen that are the most effective?
Sure. So good afternoon, and thank you for a warm welcome, and Adele for that gracious introduction. I appreciate it. You know, for those of us who read the book Half the Sky, that was written by Nicholas Kristof and his wife Cheryl Boudin, we know, and they spoke about the impact of microfinance being more powerful for women in the developing world than any law. And the reality is to provide capital to women in the United States or across the world is a really powerful thing. And so when I look at Opportunity International, and we've been in existence for over 40 years, we have actually put into place close to $9 billion of capital across the developing world. We've created 12 million jobs with a goal of 20 million jobs by 2020. And so those kinds of things are really important when you start thinking about, you know, how do you change the lives of women in the developing world. Specific programs that we focus on that have a real impact are certainly, I would say, education, job creation are two that are really impactful for us. And so we have also programs across the globe. I just got back, as a couple of my colleagues in the audience did, from a 9-day stretch across India, both in the northern part of India and then in the southern part, wherein we met with women that were doing everything from farming to being in charge of schools to starting small businesses. And so the thing I would say that's unique about us is you can provide capital and money to anyone. It's easy to do. The thing that is the most powerful thing that I think opportunity does is we wrap it together with a loan, with savings, with insurance, and then we really spend time with women and men in training them. So depending upon the program, we can spend 12 to 6 months of training in country. And we can do that, I'll finalize and wrap this up, because most people don't realize the size and scope of the organization. We have 17,000 people around the world, so we're actually on the ground. 99% of the people that work for us are nationals, so they work in country. And so we've got, just a wonderful workforce that is in country and can really get the job done.
Great, thanks. And I know, Laura, you're here speaking on your own behalf.
Yes, I'm obliged to notify you all that my opinions are my own and not those of JP Morgan Chase.
So she's channeling just herself today. Good to know. All right. So it's just a few data points. 29% of businesses across the US are owned by women. Nearly 46% of companies feature women on their management teams, and now more than 50% of business school applicants are women. And we'll get deeper into the gender gap later, but you will agree with me that women have made some progress? And how do you think your industry has supported mobilizing resources for women and kind of your short career, because you're very young? How have you seen the landscape change across your career in banking?
Absolutely. Thank you, Niamh and Adele, also for the warm introduction. I appreciate it. You're absolutely right. I mean, in financial services, for instance, today, more than 50% of our employees are women. So that's pretty surprising when you look across the senior leadership landscape, and the women that are most prominent on Wall Street seem to be so unique. There's not enough of them. However, over the course of my career in banking, which has been about 14 years, I've seen a dramatic difference in terms of the availability of opportunities for women in senior management positions. We don't have enough. I think there's some very specific reasons that we don't have more. But I'm hoping that some of the initiatives that we have both internally at our firm and across the industry, frankly, that will help to, advance the women into senior leadership positions more aggressively over the, sort of the next generation of millennials. In terms of the entrepreneurial community and the investments that we're making in the financial services industry, especially since the financial crisis, there's been a significant investment in helping to educate small and medium-sized business owners on the credit process, how to access capital, the different limitations to the credit process, and so that they can navigate the waters better. Coming out of the financial crisis, credit has been much tighter. There's no question about it. And that makes your credentials all that more important. And so it's important to all entrepreneurs, not just women. However, if you take a look at the importance that women place on their credit scores, it's much lower. All the data shows that they're not as aware of the importance of some of these indicators. So the tool sets that we need to share with women very early on when they are building a business are even more important than they have been in the past.
Okay, great. And so now just back to the gender gap, Vicki, there's loads of data from the developing world that shows the economic benefits of investing in women, including reports from your industry that says a country's GDP can go up 16% by investing in women. How do you see the gender gap closing, and what communities are you working in? Could you tell us a little bit about how Opportunity International does that, or what you've observed?
Yeah. We do a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, and I was looking at some data today that looks at the correlation between gender equality and national competitiveness. And clearly, when women are involved, countries do much better from a GDP perspective, as is evidenced by that data. But we operate in Latin America. It is not the largest place that we operate, but we do. But when we look at Latin America and we look at the involvement of women in the workforce from 1990 to today, 35% more involvement than was before. And if you look at the improvements that have been made, they have finally moved more than any other country from poverty into a middle class. So So that is an area of focus for us. And speaking a little bit about why focusing on women is important for opportunity, and these are statistics that all of you know, but in the developing world, 90 cents out of every dollar that a woman earns goes right back into her community, into her family, into making her country a better and stronger place. It's not that we don't love men. We do love men in our organization, but women in the developing world really do reinvest in building stronger communities, compared to men where 30% of every dollar goes back into building families and so forth and so on. So that is one reason that we target women so closely and follow them. The other thing that I just mentioned briefly is around the issue of education, which I touched on before. And that is, we were looking at some work in Uganda and looking at the ability for young girls to earn higher sources of income. And so for young girls specifically that graduate from secondary school in Uganda, their ability to actually earn moves from about $600 a year to close to $9,000 a year. So the importance of education, again, I'm going to go back to it, education, and then you got to have a job. You can have an education, no job, doesn't get it. You have a job, no education, not good. So those are major areas of focus for us.
Yeah. So Laura, some of the stats I gave you were the good news ones. Now here are a few of the less good. 15% of venture capital investment in 2014 went to women, and only 2.7% of venture capital funded companies had a female CEO. Why is it in this field that the gender gap is narrowing so slowly right here in the United States?
No, it's an excellent question. And interestingly, when they do invest, venture capitalists do invest in women-owned businesses, especially in the tech sector, they're 35% more lucrative, right? So their return on investment is much stronger. And you would think, venture capitalists, they're sharks, they're going to go where the money is, that they would be actively pursuing female entrepreneurs and working with them. And I think it starts out very early on in the development of the company. First of all, because of the wage gap, if you're leaving a job and you're using startup capital that you've earned on your own in order to build your business, over the course of the time that you were working, you more or less earn 75% as much as your peers. So you just have less money to start with. Then also, you may have had some difficulty in establishing credit. You may not have assets at that point in your career, depending on when you're starting, so you don't have a lot to leverage. Also, there's a lot of data that shows that female entrepreneurs are more conservative. And so when they go out and ask for capital to support their businesses and their business plans, they tend to ask for it more iteratively. They ask for less money. And so as a result, they're conservative and they're lucrative, but they grow slower. And most venture capitalists are looking for, an immediate return. They're looking for the exit. They want to see the writing on the wall. And so when, women come in and pitch their businesses, they tend to offer a more conservative view around the growth of their company than they actually may believe even. They want to underpromise and overdeliver. And so when you get in front of the venture capitalists, and they're extremely, extremely rare to find a female venture capitalist. We have only like one or two that I can think of in this city, very few in the country. There's so few that there's an organization called 37 Angels, which is like 37 women that could find each other in the venture capital industry who are working to help support female entrepreneurs. So the idea is that, you're pitching your businesses to an audience of folks that potentially could have not as much of an appreciation for the types of businesses that you're presenting, depending on the industry. Women also tend to find solutions to problems that they understand. And sometimes that means they're in industries that the men that go into venture capital, many who come out of finance or industry, manufacturing and those sorts of fields, they don't necessarily have an appreciation for. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. I know that the National Venture Capital Association has a huge push right now. They started out this fall and they're pushing this spring legislatively as well to help promote women in venture capital. There are a couple of publicly traded firms that, have recently aggressively recruited women into venture capital, and I think that's going to make a big difference. But frankly, I think that the solution has to do with men. And I think that we need to work really hard with all the guys we know in venture capital to help them to have an appreciation for the return on investment that they can expect from some of these companies. We also really have to help the female entrepreneurs in the community to better network with them. They tend to hang together. They go to golf tournaments together. They network together at the Chicago Club, even here at the Standard Club, right? So we need to find windows of opportunity, though, to really introduce them to the talented female entrepreneurs that we have here in Chicago. And I feel really good about the fact that I know that we were a sponsor, our firm was a sponsor of the Venture Capital Summit here that was hosted by World Business Chicago. It's enormously successful, brought in venture capitalists from around the country. And we're going to have a specific allocation. Over at 1871, about 30% of our entrepreneurs are women, and we're going to save 30% of the spots for female entrepreneurs, just to make sure that we have an adequate representation of the talents.
So the charge is to infiltrate the old boys network?
That's right.
Okay, got it. Laura was just talking about networks, Vicki, and I know with some of the programs we've had for the Women in Global Development Forum, we hear about networks around that work with other women and use best known methods, and it gets a bit easier with social media. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you see networks working within your work in microfinance?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. So bearing in mind that the clients that we serve are, for the most part, at the bottom of the pyramid. So we're serving people that don't have collateral. And I would offer that the repayment rate across the portfolio is 98%, so not bad for people that are, at the bottom of the pyramid. But to your question, the reason it's so powerful and there's such a repayment rate is that women operate in groups. And so the first point of entry into Opportunity International is through group lending. And women naturally come together in communities and in groups easier, I think, than men do. And so, typically our loans start out at $150. We've got literally hundreds of thousands of women today that are now getting loans of tens of thousands of dollars. And so we are graduating across Opportunity from micro-lending into some small to medium enterprise lending, which is focused not just actually on women, but also on men in some very important areas like farming and teaching and other things that I mentioned. But back to, and I focus on the trip that I just returned from in India. The strength and the power of the community of these women groups not only allows us to ensure that we are repay the loans because they will step in for one another if their loans aren't paid, but it also provides an unusual outlet for them to grow and develop and have partnerships.
Yep. Thank you. Another hot topic when it comes to this is working mothers. We've heard Gwyneth Paltrow's comments about how tough it was to be a movie star because you didn't have the 9-to-5 routine. I don't know how much sympathy she got for that one. But 70% of women with children under the age of 18 work in some way outside the home. Laura, how are you guys working with that? How do you see the private sector helping moms re-enter the workforce and kind of thinking through this gap that we have with working mothers?
Yeah, that's an age-old question. I have to say that I think being a working mom is like the hardest job in the world. Like, I really do. You're constantly trying to balance between satisfying your employer and your own personal sense of satisfaction around a job well done at the office, with, this enormous responsibility you have to shape and mold, the identity of, your child. And that it's really, really hard. So I want to start out by saying that. In financial services, I feel as though, I feel very fortunate I feel fortunate in that there's a lot of support for working moms that in terms of programs that are available, whether it's like backup daycare and, of course, most of us, make salaries that are sufficient to help to support childcare expenses, which is not, the case for a large part of the population. So I feel very fortunate in that regard. I also feel very fortunate that I have a great partner. My husband is here today, and Matt, who really helps out where he can. Well, he travels a lot, so it's a really difficult balance. So I think we haven't done as great a job in financial services until recently around this idea of reentry. We've been very linear in our thinking around how we brought people into the firm. We had analyst and associate programs. You came up through the ranks, and if you left, there wasn't really a good way for you to come back, or if you did, you had to almost kind of start off at the bottom again, which really seemed unfair and not appropriate based on the credentials that you bring to the table. But more recently, the entire industry, all of the major banks have, including JP Morgan Chase, have instituted programs around reentry. And I'm really proud of the fact that we're doing this type of work where we have, cohorts of women who are returning to the workforce. Most of them have worked in financial services before. They're going through specialized training, which kind of brings them up to speed on all the risk and compliance, changes and licensing changes that have happened while they've been out of the workforce. And it's helping them to kind of re-enter at a level that makes a lot more sense for them and to make the investment in the continued growth of their career within financial services rather than changing course. And I would say that that's been a really dramatic shift in the industry over like the last 5 years or so, that we've come to the point where we've decided that we're going to invest in this. Invest in the training, invest in the transition of these women. So I think we're on the right track.
Good to hear. And Vicki, can you talk a little bit about the specific challenges and benefits for you guys of investing in working moms?
Sure, and I was also sitting here thinking, I'm happy to talk about that, but being a working mother and having raised 2 daughters who are now in their 20s, I agree with Laura. It's very difficult, not impossible, but difficult to make all those things come together in a meaningful sort of way and raise young women that think deeply and care about the world. And I would say, as a side note, for those of us women kind of across this platform today, it's really incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can from a leadership position to ensure that we are mentoring, that when there are openings, that we ensure that women are on the slate to be interviewed. It sounds so easy. It's really not that easy, but we should do that, because that is actually likely the only thing that is going to change, in my opinion, significantly the gender gap. What do we do at Opportunity? So briefly, we have a program that we're very proud of that's called Social Performance Management. And it allows us to go in, because we are regulated banks, and we can, when our clients are paying off their loans, we can ask them questions. And so we ask a range of questions that are involved in their personal life, in their social life, financial life, and so forth. And it allows us to really focus very clearly on what the client needs are. And that question around how do we help working mothers is one of those questions. And so, case in point, we are testing today in Rwanda with several groups, a mother that will take all the children in the group while the other 20 are off doing other types of businesses. And so she's formed, if you will, a daycare center. So I think listening to clients, being very focused and client-centric, even in the developing world, there are ways that you can do that to really make a difference for working moms.
Yeah, sounds like it. And now the age-old question when it comes to this, can we have it all? A lot of people read Anne-Marie Slaughter's piece in The Atlantic. I thought it was a very honest piece, actually, last year. And it created a stir. And Sheryl Sandberg's book, kind of to your point about leaning in, bringing people on boards. I saw Karen Yan is shaking her head about including people, mentoring young women. Of course, we need men to do that too. But what do you think about career, family, closing the gap? Just kind of closing thoughts before we go out to the audience to have them hear about some of their questions. Shall I go to Laura first?
Sure. Wow. So I think it's very hard to have it all. And I know that, a lot of women stand up, professional women, we stand up at these conferences all the time, and we talk about how hard we're working and how we're getting what we think is it all. But I think it's really hard to do. And that's why we have, particularly in financial services, so many of my colleagues leave the workforce when they have, more than 1 or 2 children. And because it comes to a point where if you're trying to continue the momentum that you had around accelerating your career and getting ahead, that you have to make deep sacrifices in order to be able to do that. And so we lose a lot of people. Some of us navigate, the resources that are available, or that we're lucky enough to have the right boss to make our way through a transition period. But I do think it is more of like a marathon than a sprint. So like you have some parts of the marathon where you're doing pretty good and you feel really good, and then there are others where you're like, like I'm not sure I'm going to make it through. So I think the most important thing is that we're all supportive of one another, whether it's your team that you work with directly that constitute your direct reports if one of them's having a challenge and managing through, finding ways to help support them, or colleagues. I know we have a lot of women's networking groups at our firm. We have lean-in circles, and the idea there is to help people to find solutions for how to manage through difficult transitions. We also have an organization called Accessibility, and its whole mission is to help people, all employees, frankly, but there's predominantly women participating, through life's challenges in your career. So, that could involve raising a family, but it often also includes dealing with the death of a parent or caring for a sick family member. So, those types of institutional programs at big organizations can really make a difference. And I think that we're getting to a place in the entrepreneurial community where we're finding, a collection of resources that can be helpful in that regard. The whole advent of these cluster-based innovation centers, like 1871, like my friends from the Chicago Innovation Exchange are here today, also a really fantastic place. They provide infrastructure and support, in some cases daycare centers. They're starting to look at the different things that they can do in order to empower the women, but frankly, everybody in the center to balance their work-life challenges better.
Yeah, we got a note yesterday about some frequent speakers that come to the council that have decreed that they will not go on panels of more than 2 if it's all men. And I was like horrified. I said, there goes any panel on the global economy, because it's like impossible to find women practically on certain topics. They just don't exist. So I thought it was quite brave,
or
actually.
they're really in high demand. So,
yeah. Vicki, I'll toss that question over to you now.
Yeah, so, this is kind of the age-old question. So I've thought a lot about this, and I have a story. I do think you can have it all, you just can't have it all every day. Yeah. So case in point, some days you're going to be a great executive, and if you're a mother, maybe you're going to be a great mother. And if you're a wife, you might be a great wife. You may be a great daughter, you may be a great friend, but you're not likely to be great every day. And I think going into your life, if you choose to be all those things, accepting that you're going to have to make choices. And learning to live with those choices is tough. And so I'll share with you a story which for me is poignant because it was real. I was at Delta Airlines and was one of the most senior executives. And at the time, Leo Mullen, who's known and beloved in the Chicago community, was the CEO. And he came to me and said, the board is interested in you being in line to be the president, but we're not happy, he said it kinder than that, with your educational background, and so you need to go to Harvard for a 16-week program, and then it will improve, this is real, it will improve the likelihood that you'll be, the right candidate, because there were 3 of us that were vying for the position. So I flash over to my family. I had a 13-year-old who was right in the middle of adolescence, really bright young woman, and was constantly teased about being the smartest kid in the class. And I had a 7-year-old. And, you know, I looked at my family situation and thought, this is not a good time to be leaving 2 young girls. So I went back and said, no, I can't go. And he said, you know that means that you will not be considered for this role. And I said, I understand. I get it. I really do. So the thing I would say about that is I left there and I thought, you know what? I never actually really thought about being the president so much before they presented that. And then I thought, you know, what the heck? I can be president. I don't have to be president of Delta. I can be president of something else. So that was the impetus that really caused me to leave the private sector, one of a number of things. So I offer that because you know, you can have it all. You just can't have it all the time. Those are my views.
Well, I think what you say strikes me. It reminds me of one of our former speakers, actually, that Opportunity International has a relationship with Carly Fiorina when she came and spoke, and her story, there's a bit of reimagining. Like you say, I didn't imagine myself as president, and she had a lot of tenacity and the ability to reimagine. If you haven't listened to that on our website, I would recommend it. She got a standing ovation. She was fantastic. It was about 18 months ago, 2 years ago now. She was excellent. Anyway, thanks. We're going to get some more out of these ladies, but let's go out to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your arm, wait for the mic, and make sure your question's a question. Let's start off right over here, please, with Beth. Right here, Beth from Goldman Sachs, please. No, don't, because we're live streamed and then you're not projecting at all.
All right, thank you so much for coming in your comments. My question is about men. You know, a few times we've mentioned in this panel that men are an important part of this issue and closing the gap. Also, recent research, you know, showing that men who do housework at home, when daughters see that, their career ambitions tend to rise and things like that. I'm encouraged by the number of men in the room, but would love your thoughts on some ways that you've seen men engage in this dialogue and ways that we as women can better bring them into the process.
Vicki, why don't we start off with you?
Yeah, so, I mean, the reality is, when I look over the course of my, wow, long career, almost 30 years with Delta, and now 9 years in the nonprofit world. Every mentor I ever had, except for one, was a man. And so I give a lot of credit to men that really, and one was Andy Young. I just saw him last week and sat down with him, and behind the scenes, you know, back in the 80s, he was paving the way for minorities as well as women to be promoted in the airline industry, which was, for the most part, very male-dominated. So, you know, I would say, to answer your question, men are incredibly important. And developing relationships with your boss, which for the most part is going to be a man, and having it be a relationship that is meaningful, one that he likes you and wants to spend time with you. We do a lot of talking about mentoring, but in my opinion, the best mentoring relationships are actually when you really like somebody and you want to go out and have a beer with them. If you don't want to go out and have a beer with somebody, you're not likely to be a good mentor to that person, which sounds kind of simple, but there's a hugely important role for men if we're going to continue to make progress. Women have their part. We all need to do everything we can, as I said earlier, around getting women in front of these important roles as we look at recruiting. But really bringing men in and developing strong and meaningful relationships and talking about how they can assist you and getting to know you as a person is a really vital part to closing the gender gap.
Yeah, there are a lot of boys in your world, Laura.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree entirely with all of Vicki's comments. And I would say, too, you know, when I was promoted to become an officer in the firm, you know, I worked for a man. And my sponsor, which is somebody who, you know, is not in the business with you, but comes to know you through all of the people that have worked with you over the past, you know, I don't know how many, 10 years of my career at that point, was a man. And he was a hard-charging trading floor kind of guy, too, you know, just to give you a perspective. So, it's really critically important to be someone that by reputation networks easily with the men in the firm and the men in leadership in the firm. And you have to feel really comfortable approaching them and getting to know them. And I think to Vicki's point, you may get to a point where they're comfortable, having a coffee with you for 15 minutes, and that's really great. Could be like the equivalent of going for a beer, depending on the seniority of the person that you're getting to know. But I think that's critically important in building your career in a big institution like ours. We have 250,000 employees. Absolutely critical. I did also want to say that we're kind of going back to that conversation around venture capital. I meet with lots of entrepreneurs from across the city in my role as a board member at 1871, and many of them are women. There's about, I think 8 of us, some really amazing women on the board of 1871. And so we attract the disproportionate number of the female entrepreneurs to come and visit with us. And one of the things I always tell them is I say, well, what's your exit plan for your business? A lot of them, if I talk to the men, they're like, oh, I got a plan. You talk to the women, they're like, well, I'm just thinking about the next 2 years. Like, how am I going to build the business? When I say, well, what's your exit plan? And if you don't have an exit plan, you should go out and get to know venture capitalists, and you should, before you need them. Just go out and network with them. You don't need them now, but if they know you when you call 3 years from now and say, I'm ready, then you're gonna be known to them. They're gonna understand you personally. And I think that's and 99% of the time, they're gonna be men. So I think that's really important. And really quick, are you from Goldman Sachs? I just wanted to do a quick, shout out for your firm, the 10,000 Women campaign, an extraordinary boost to female entrepreneurs. And I think, we've got a similar program at JP Morgan Chase called Small Business Forward. We don't have a number on it like you do, 10,000. I think that's clever. But they just, if you haven't taken a look, they just published through Babson the results of their efforts so far, and the results are astonishing. So,
yeah, we hosted Dina Powell here before. It's quite a story. Yeah. So the lesson is appear like you're ready to drink beer is what I'm taking from this. Okay, I know
beer,
how to
wine,
look like that,
coffee,
so that's
tea,
good.
Whatever.
Okay, next audience question. Yeah, right over there, please. The woman in the blonde hair. Thanks.
Thanks. My question has to do with the combination of gender gap and also age discrimination. I am at that age, and I have friends that have encountered this, where not only is the transition going back into the workplace, maybe after having children or divorce or some other life-changing experience, challenging, but it's extra challenging being a woman that's middle-aged or whatever you want to call it, over 40. I mean, I have friends younger and older that have encountered this. And I'm just curious about your perspective as leading women in organizations and how you might be able to influence the way hiring decisions are made and how non-traditional resumes are evaluated and considered. Because I think a lot of us are in that world at this point, and with an aging population, it's going to become even more of an issue, I think.
Laura, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. First of all, I think that in developing and growing businesses, just on the entrepreneurial side, I'll start with, the idea that bringing in people of various and differing backgrounds in order to spur and manage innovation, and then also to manage the scaling and growth of the company, is critical. Right? It's critical to the success. So in terms of kind of making a transition, if you think about making a transition from a large corporation into a growing organization, there's a ton of appreciation for experience in that regard. I have seen it at our firm where some of the more senior women, everyone call it the glass ceiling, whatever, they get to a point where they begin to become passed over by men for promotions. And it can be a very painful experience. And often, to your point, it kind of systemically started like 10 years earlier when they were asked by, someone who's now in a position of much more senior leadership to make a geographic move, to do something to step out of their comfort zone in order to move ahead in the firm. And there may have been that point in their career, to your point, Vicki, where you said, I'm not in a position to do that right now. And then you carry it with you for like 8 or 10 years on, and you can't shake it. And so then you're perceived as being somebody who isn't willing to do what it takes to get ahead and to get to the next level. So my advice in that regard is to leave. Leave before that happens. Move on, go and shop yourself and your talents elsewhere, right? And I also learned a good lesson from my boss, who's a leader here at the council, my former boss, Glenn Tilton, who said you should never be afraid to lose your job. You should put yourself in a position, whether it's financially, in terms of how you manage your own personal finances, or in level of confidence around your network that's outside of the firm, to be like, okay, if I lose my job, I'll be okay. Like, I know who I'm going to go and talk to. I know how I'm going to network my way into the next place that I want to be.
Vicki?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting subject, and I agree with everything that Laura said. I would only add one thing so as to not go on, and I think to the degree we can elevate that kind of issue and thinking within not only women's groups, and there's some terrific, I'm from Atlanta, so I can unabashedly say how much I love Chicago because I'm not from here, but Chicago has some really fabulous networking women's groups. And so to elevate that issue within the, not only within the, only just the women's organization across the Chicagoland area, but also to begin really pushing as senior women this issue that you mentioned from an HR perspective, to make it, you know, kind of a front burner thing that we're thinking about. So I'll take that with me. You know, I think about the other issues that I already discussed around involving women, getting them in front of senior people around jobs. But this notion of there being not only discrimination around gender, but also around age, I think is accurate. And I agree, if it's really serious, you should leave. But I also think we should do more in getting that to be a front-burning issue with women's organizations.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, right up here, please. Adele Simmons in the front row. Adele, wait for the mic there. Sorry, the young woman's coming right here. She's on this side, Adele.
I'd like to shift back a little bit to the investing part of all of this. And I'm interested, Vicki, particularly in the countries you're working in. How much is the government supporting this, and how much are governments engaged in the whole issue of investing in women?
So, you know, it's a great question, Adele. And it depends upon the country. So we're in 8 countries in Africa, and 4 out of 8, the presidents and the first ladies of Africa are very involved with us and very involved in making women's issues, you know, one of their top priorities. As I said, just in India, it's becoming a very, very big issue across India, thank God, finally. So governments, in the developing world, it just depends upon the leader. We as an organization have taken an approach to go through developing great relationships with the first ladies in all the countries we serve, because it's interesting, it is an easier way to get into a senior position as far as the countries go. And the first ladies typically, obviously, want to promote women, and they will make it a priority. So, I mean, that's my answer to your question. It just, you know, some of the places we work, as you well know, are so volatile. Like the DRC right now, we're in the Congo, and it's a crazy place. I mean, who would own a bank in the Congo? Would J.P. Morgan Chase? Yeah. So, but we're going to stay at it, and we're going to use this strategy of going through the first ladies to get at it.
May I add something? You know, you made a very good point about managing risk, whether it's political risk or economic risk or systemic operational risk, whatever it is. When you're building a business, you've got different types of risks that you present to the marketplace. And when when you come into a bank, we're looking at everything. So we're like, you know, really, you know, the worst examiners of all of your risk of anybody. But there's definitely, you know, some newer models around how to analyze risk that are, you know, resulting in some new companies coming up. I think it was just actually reported that Avant Credit here in Illinois, it's the fastest growing company in Illinois. This is an organization that has, you know, specific predictive modeling that they leverage in order to do like you do with the communities of women to assess the risk a little bit differently than we might have traditionally. And I think when you are building a business, you've got to think about up front, a number of different things. And that involves, what are the risks associated with your business? Are you manufacturing abroad? Do you have to? And if you do, what are the risks associated with that? These are the types of questions that you've got to think about as you present your business plan. And one other thing, too, that introduces unforeseen risk is sometimes when we're being really conservative and we're leveraging our friends and family for free advice on, how are we going to incorporate or how are we going to manage our accounting practices, we introduce new risk because we're not dealing with the experts. And you have to pay for the right experts. And in a lot of cases, you can get access, if you can't afford it, through the Women's Business Development Center or the Small Business Administration, or even places like CIE in 1871. You can get access to real experts who can advise you, but it's really critically important to do that, that work up front.
Thanks. Yeah, why don't we take this lady right here, please, at the chick table?
Do you feel that the universities, and even below that, the high schools, are working hard enough to educate women to understand, first of all, what capital needs are? They may have a brilliant idea for a small business, but not know exactly how to put together a business plan or how to go about assessing their capital needs. And I think that has to start in a high school level just to get people to think that way. And I think historically it hasn't happened as much for women. What has your experience been?
Laura.
I think it's a great point. I think the universities are doing an increasingly better and better job. There's lots of, first of all, women are disproportionately represented at universities now. More than half of the students are women. And they're entering into the business sort of majors much more aggressively than they ever have in the past. There's still a lot of work to do to get them into science and engineering at more aggressive levels. But as a result of being in the business school, they have access to entrepreneurship classes, clubs that they can join that do give them the expertise to put together a business plan or at least to understand what it means. In the high schools, we could be doing so much more. I think there's a number of not-for-profit organizations that try to help with that, like JA, as an example. But at the same time, to know when you're in high school that you have a predisposition to starting your own business, is unique. So I think that the universities are doing a better and better job than they had in the past.
Yes, and the only thing I'd add is, in this community, it's really impressive to see, especially University of Chicago, Northwestern, Wheaton, Loyola, DePaul, as far as opportunity are concerned, they're actually all over us around wanting to work with us on entrepreneur classes. And we speak regularly at all of those universities around what we're doing and how we can engage both young women and men in the work. So I'd have to say, when I look at the Chicago community, especially the universities, are very engaged in this whole notion of, how do you build a business plan? How do you invest capital? What are the risks involved as far as this community goes?
Thanks. Next question, please. Yeah. The young woman in the back, please. Thank you. Zoe, by you there at that table. Yeah, there she is. Thanks.
Thank you. My question is, how can we women help each other out and get rid of the conventional wisdom that presumes successful women to be reluctant of other women in the business world?
Oh, that. Yeah. Do you want to go first, Vicki? Yeah.
Sure. So the first thing I would say, which sounds pretty simple, is I often think that women are other women's own worst enemies. If you think about a job opening, typically not always, so I don't want to classify it as always, but the opening, could be such that there are 3 women and 9 men that are applying for the job, and there seems to be more competition oftentimes between women than there are across the spectrum of these are 10 people that are applying. It's not just the 3 women, it's all in. So I think, and this gets a little bit back to the question around can we have it all, and there's this big debate around Sandberg versus lots of other people. My answer to your question is we just need to give each other a break occasionally. We're too hard on each other. If you decide to be a working mother, go for it. If you decide you want to be an executive, go for it. I mean, I think it's fabulous. We live in a world where we have the ability to choose. So it sounds simple. It's not that simple. Support each other, really support each other. Don't just talk about it, but put actions into a work plan wherein you're really organizing a group of women. One thing that I did, and I'll wrap it up, when I was at Delta, we developed a women's network. And the first event we had, I think we expected to bring in around 75 women. It was the head of HR and I. We decided to have dinner with women, and this was 2000. We had 555 women at this event. And it was simply that there was so much pent-up demand for women actually wanting to get together, be together. So my advice to you, set up a circle of women, support each other, get together, create your own network.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hear people talk about this, that they don't feel that they get enough support from fellow women, and I have never felt that way. And I wonder, too, if it's because in some industries, and ours in particular, there are so few that I know now, as a senior executive at our firm, I get pinged, probably like 6 or 8 times a day by, young analysts and associates that would like to come by and visit with me and get some advice about their career path and that sort of thing. And I try and honor as many of those requests as I can, but at the end of the day, there are fewer of us. And there are coming into the firm classes of analysts that are 50% women and 50% men, right? So, I think perhaps part of it is that we're so pressed that you may feel that we're not giving you the attention that you are looking for. And so I have to agree that these, formalized, take advantage of the formal programs. Sometimes I think too among the millennials there's a little bit of skepticism about the effectiveness of these formal networking groups that are kind of came up over from I guess from the 80s or whatever, as women really more aggressively entered financial services. And I said, well, what's that going to do for me? Because they haven't, especially the younger women who haven't yet had the challenges of balancing work and family, they just kind of are a little skeptical about them. But they can be enormously valuable opportunities to network with people who could become your sponsors. At wherever you work.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that too, since it's coming from a young woman in the audience, a lot of people also would ping people in our world to come and speak. And you don't really need to speak to somebody who's 20 years older than you. You could talk to somebody who's 3 years older than you. I'm always a bit surprised, like, I'm not a good example. My circuitous route through the Chicago Council, you may be better off talking to a program officer who's had an internship for a year. There's a lot to be learned from somebody who's only a couple of steps ahead of you in your career, as opposed to talking to a vice president or a managing director or a CEO of an organization. There's value, and there's value in that for them to learn how to mentor at an early age. So I think that's another way to think about it. Thanks. Next question. Yeah, the woman right there, please, with the glasses. Yeah, exactly.
Hi. We've spoken many times about, I'm sure you all have sponsor versus mentorship. And I believe, Laura, you mentioned how you had a sponsor who has helped you. Now you all are at senior levels in your respective firms. Do you actively try and be a sponsor of women who may not know you? Because I think a lot of us in this, senior level that trying to get to the next level, we hit that wall where, yes, there are plenty of men. I too have benefited from male mentorship, but at this level, you need that sponsorship to take it to that next level when you're looking at C-suite and more executive senior level opportunities. So to what extent do you believe C-level women should play in sponsorship and actively sponsoring women?
Actually, Laura, maybe you'll just give a brief definition of the difference between sponsor and mentor. I know you kind of implied it, but I think for some of the audience it might be good to be clear.
Yeah, good point.
That's a good point. So, so the idea of sponsorship means that you're going to help carry, the career of the person that you're sponsoring with you. You're going to help extend their reputation within the firm with your colleagues and peers. You're going to recommend them for promotions where appropriate. You're going to celebrate them as a leader of your firm in whatever level they're at. A mentor is somebody more who you would go to regularly for advice, and they may, regularly visit with you and give you their perspectives on things, but they're not necessarily going to invest in you to the degree that a sponsor would. And I would say that, for me, I find it incredibly important that I do everything that I can to serve as a sponsor, particularly for the folks that have served as my direct reports. You know, for those that have excelled in their performance working for me, I do everything I can to help extend their reputation. I'm lucky because I sit in a regional cross line of business, cross-functional role, that I have an audience of peers that is very broad. So if somebody wants to cross over to a different line of business, I actively, you know, network them in and promote their reputation within that line of business. And I also do it when people leave the firm. You know, when people come to me and they say, I have to leave the firm because my job's been eliminated, or I'm thinking of leaving the firm for various reasons, I immediately reach out to my network of colleagues around Chicago and help them to be introduced as, you know, people that I have a lot of confidence in, and that they can be successful in anything that they chose to do.
Vicki, did you want to add anything to that?
No, maybe one very brief thing, but so we can have maybe one more question, then I'm thinking of a closing thing I'd like to say. But I think the idea of mentoring is something we should be doing almost every hour. You know, we formalize it so much that it isn't real sometimes, and so there are 10 opportunities a day to offer, you know, a word of encouragement or advice or engage, and it doesn't have to be formal. In fact, I think some of the best relationships around mentoring are when they're just informal feedback opportunities along the way. So don't wait for just sitting down with people. You know, get up in the morning and say, you know, I'm going to talk to Linda, Sue, Mary, Maria, so forth and so on, and offer feedback. That's the only thing I'd add.
Well, we just have 2 minutes left, so why don't I give each of you a minute on the mic just to close out. We'll go to Laura first. Any closing?
Yeah, you know, I guess I would just say, you know, on the same riff on mentoring and sponsorship, don't be afraid to approach somebody you don't know and raise your hand. You know, you can, every executive is going to be open to having you come in and say, I just am wondering, you know, I'm interested in the work that you're doing in your area, and I'd love to find a way to be a part of it. How can I help from the seat I sit in now? And they'll give you stretch assignments, stuff that's beyond the work that you do every day that will help you to earn a reputation with them. And so in some ways, you have to encourage people to invest in you in a corporate environment. That's different than, you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you're out pitching your business every day and you're working really hard to get people's attention. So I wish you all luck, and I ask everyone that's here today to think about talking to a man that you know and trust, who you know, I have them, who you know doesn't really quite get it, right? Doesn't really quite get it. Like, he's trying, but, you know, it still shows kind of this level of insensitivity that, you know, you're trying to get past. And make a commitment to helping him, because he trusts you, he knows you, and he's going to give you an audience that he might not even give his wife. So, you know, in terms of talking about the business solutions to you know, building more bridges for women in business. So give it a thought.
Be the mentor.
Yeah.
That's right. They're the mentees.
Force yourself on
That's
them.
right.
Sure.
Vicki.
Yeah, so my closing comments would be for each of you to avoid getting stuck in your own paradigms. And what I mean by that is, you know, I started right out of college, was a flight attendant, and ended up, fortunately, because of good luck and a lot of hard work, you know, becoming the number 3 person at Delta Airlines, which is unheard of. But I did a lot of things. I moved around. I was very resilient. I took jobs that I knew I didn't have the skills to do because people believed in me, and so I really took a lot of risks. And then, you know, 9 years ago, moved into the nonprofit world, which I knew nothing about the nonprofit space. But I learned, and actually learned that the really great nonprofits are run very much like private sector businesses in that you measure great performance, you set up great boards. You know, it's really similar. And so my closing words for you all is, I think sometimes we all get hung up around, I can't do this because I'm a corporate person, I can't do that because I'm 60 years old, I can't do this because I don't know finance, I can't do that because I don't know operations. stop. If you get an opportunity and you really want to advance your career, you know, take a leap. Go for it. Don't get hung up in your own paradigms. That's my closing thought.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a fabulous discussion. Please join me in thanking Laura and Vicki for today. Very good. We really hope to see you all at the Global Health Symposium. Give it a shot. It's half a day, I know, but it's well worth it, and we'll have loads of topics. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.